With Rhino, and on the guest line now, our good friend Trey Hairston from Butler Snow LLP law firm. How's it going, Trey?
It's good, Gerard. How are you?
Doing great. Good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on today. So, just to get our listeners a little background, you're involved in at Butler Snow. You're involved primarily in economic development, assisting with bonds and tax incentives, TIFs, et cetera, other public finance, and just in general, helping to move our state forward in that regard. So tell us kind of what's going on in that world right now.
Yeah, it's a chaotic world. Primarily, I'm on either the public finance, the public side of a transaction, or the private side of a transaction. And throughout America, municipal bonds, it's a robust industry, about a $3.9 trillion industry right now. And when you think about it in terms of what COVID-19's impact on not only this state but America, you're talking about airport bonds, transportation bonds for subways and things of that nature. So with the downturn in the economy in terms of travel, tourism, just your everyday ordinary work travel on a subway in a city like New York, you're talking about catastrophic economic damage that just can't be recovered overnight. So the path forward in a post-COVID society or post-COVID Mississippi or post-COVID America, what do you do to rebuild and do your best to recapture that investment and that revenue? Although difficult, let's try.
Yeah, we're talking to Trey Hairston at Butler Snow. So Trey, what about bond ratings for states and municipalities? How is this impacting them, given that they're obviously all running budget deficits as a result of the shortfalls in revenue? Sure.
So, the SEC on May 4th issued an announcement or notice from its chairman. His name is Jay Clayton, and then the director of municipal securities, Rebecca Olson. That notice talked about the scrutiny on continuing disclosure and just how you deal with it in this COVID-19 economy. So, a lot more scrutiny on revenues, looking at exactly where you are currently. I've got 2 transactions that I'm working on right now that are desperately needed. One for water and sewer in a community that just had a major pipe to burst, and they're under a consent decree. So that money is desperately needed. So how do you explain your cash position, because cash is king right now, I think, to a rating agency or to the SEC or to any of those entities that are looking at debt? And so you've got to do it factually, Gerard. You've got to make those cuts. Not only does small business and large businesses and cities have to make those expenditure cuts, you've just got to do it. You've got to look at refinancing anything that can be refinanced or restructured. On the phone with a hotel client right now that has some municipal debt that was done years ago, just looking at how you restructure it so we can avoid some of the worst case scenarios, and that's Chapter 11 and Chapter 9, 9 for municipalities and government and 11 for business. So the rating agencies, they're looking at it, and you want to maintain a very robust cash position. If you have reserves, you want to talk about a very balanced way to utilize those reserves if you have to. And most importantly, you just want to be a good steward of the taxpayers' dollars.
Yeah, and you got to believe, don't you, Trey, that the rating agencies are watching with a sharp eye on this bill that's making its way through Washington. That I think there's a big gap between the parties on that, but it feels like there's going to be some sort of relief for states and municipalities, this time on the revenue side, is a way to compensate for loss of revenues. got to think that figures into this as well, huh?
I mean, it has to. Not only that, I mean, you've got to focus on the revenue side of it because you've got to keep those essential, um, you know, safeguards in place. You need police, you need fire, you
Yeah.
need first responders. You've got to operate. You've got to be able to do that to address things that may come up in communities like ours. It's spring, it's tornado season, so you've got to be able to respond and do that quickly and efficiently. So communities have to be able to have revenue coming in. But on the other side of the coin, Gerard, I do think there does have to be some type of legislation that looks at stimulus, that
Yeah.
looks at, we're never going to recover that lost revenue from that lost time. So how do we get the economy going in a way that it's as robust as it was before? And so how do you encourage investment and get people to develop again? So I think from an economic development standpoint, you're going to have to look at industries that I think that are going to really rapidly bounce back and respond, like healthcare, like the life sciences, artificial intelligence. For example, tourism is a very robust industry in Mississippi. Our hotels, airports, airplanes, like so. How do you get that particular industry back where it was pre COVID-19? And I think that's through technology. That's through doing things and using science and logic to be able to get people comfortable with going back into a hotel. And so that's the direction I think we need to look towards. I think logistics is a huge industry that's going to bounce back and maybe even have not taken the hit that it has. That's one that I think is maintain a pretty level, stable cash balance and is moving along. So but back to your central question, I just think that the legislation has to do a really good balance of looking at both the cash and getting revenues back to where they were and really stimulating the economy.
Yeah.
And if it's asset driven, equipment driven, looking at how to make sure that's something that we can incentivize pushing that investment back to the states. And in rural America, I think it's going to be a huge hotspot in terms of broadband.
Yeah, I agree. And, I've seen, had a fair amount of experience, as you're probably aware, of working with the private equity community, which is centered for the most part in New York and a few blocks in New York, actually. A lot of people don't realize that. But, going up there to meetings and you go down one elevator and you cross the street and go up another one for the next meeting. But nonetheless, there's lots of discussion I'm seeing about some of those firms expanding their presence in other areas and sort of shifting some of their resources out of Manhattan into perhaps Nashville, Jacksonville, Austin. And I worked with a private equity firm, as a matter of fact, in the Nashville area, mezzanine debt group. So there's going to be opportunity. You got to believe, Trey, even in Mississippi, we should be thinking about attracting businesses that are looking to exit some of those areas.
Yeah, I honestly think, Gerard, the most important thing that we can invest in as Mississippians in terms of our economy are twofold. I think it's rural and enhanced and more robust broadband, because I think that's what we are. That will fuel someone's ability in rural Mississippi to be able to do commerce all around the state and all around the country very quickly. So I think investing in that is vital from the state standpoint, from local government standpoint. Anything you can do to enhance your ability to bring the internet to your constituents is critically important. And then the second thing, I've been beating the drum about this for quite a while. I've always argued that healthcare is an economic driver. And you're going to see some of the PPE and some of the drug manufacturers, the additive ingredient manufacturing, all of those components that make the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry what it is. I think you're going to see a lot of activity in the States. And if there's any way to capture it, through training, through saying that we're poised to receive that capital, even in rural Mississippi, where I think that a lot of that development
Trey,
can
hold
really
that thought. Can you come back with us for the next segment? Can you hang on for a minute?
Yeah, I think I got a little time. Yeah.
Okay, a couple more questions. We'll be back with Trey Hairston. Back with you. We've got our guest, Trey Hairston from Butler Snow. We were talking about economic development. And Trey, before we went to break, you were talking about your view of healthcare being an area of economic stimulus. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so, I just think it can be a real driver where, one of our weaknesses in our state is comorbidities as a result of perhaps diabetes or obesity and things of that nature. And I've always believed you can take your weakness and perhaps turn it into a strength by not only focusing on it from the research and development standpoint, where there's lots of federal dollars and private investment in a lot of states around the country that are looking at that. But you can also, I think you can look at it from the standpoint of the widgets that are produced from that particular industry. So it's twofold. I think there's just a lot of a potential to capture some of that ancillary development as a result of the healthcare industry.
So what would you like to see Mississippi do along those lines? Anything in particular, Trey, that you're thinking about? But you're absolutely right. It just seems like every study you ever see about health and the health of the population of a given state, we always seem to be stuck at the bottom there, where we've got just a kind of a plethora of all the issues that most cause. So we've got the unfortunate, I guess, dichotomy and dynamic of being the poorest state and having the most unhealthy population. It just exacerbates it.
Yeah, but therein lies I think the key to our success. Really turning that negative into a positive and investing in that particular sector to make it more attractive to, and at the end of the day, it's not only a quality of life issue. I think by really tackling it, you signal to the rest of the world where we're really going to put some strategies in place that will make this particular sector grow. So you might have the brightest minds in the state of Mississippi that are willing to stay, or you might have the brightest minds in the country or world willing to come and help tackle one of the most difficult problems to tackle. And I think there's so many different facets in terms of the way you approach it, regarding investing at the top, investing in the middle, investing at the bottom. But it's certainly a target shift. It's a target approach, and it's just another particular industry that I think would be really, really advantageous to go after.
Yeah, and you got to believe, given this pandemic situation, that there are opportunities that aren't even a twinkle in anybody's eyes today, frankly. And you got to believe that. And it's just kind of opens up whole new doors of opportunities. And I think the other thing we're seeing, Trey, you may not agree, but it seems like we're seeing lots of coordination and collaboration between the public and private sector at almost an unprecedented rate in pursuit of therapies and vaccines and science and mitigation measures, things we can't even dream of today. I still believe in my heart that somebody's going to invent something that you can't envision that is going to go a long way towards just making us safe, but very easily and without a lot of intrusion in our lives and asking questions and taking temperatures and all that sort of stuff. Some really smart people out there, and they have lots of tools at their disposal to develop these things. We need to make sure Mississippi is participating in that.
Yeah, I think that's why, Gerard, investing in rural broadband is so vitally important. And you said it. You said we've got a lot of smart people out there, and to connect those smart people, to get them to either stay in Mississippi or recruit smart people here, I think that broadband component is really vital. I also think, we've got to do things to foster investment and encourage it. And so, the legislature passed last night, the COVID-19 Mississippi Business Assistance Act. Part of it's geared towards those $2,000 payments for recovery, and some of it's grants to try as best as possible to make people whole. It's virtually impossible, but that's the goal of the program. But in terms of the stimulus, that side of the coin, as we're looking towards recovering and how do we create more jobs and get the economy back where it was, I think that is going to definitely require some really creative legislation. I think it may require, investing in some sort of loan fund that really pushes our state towards those industries that we know are going to be vital in this post-COVID society. So STEM, artificial intelligence, again, the healthcare, life sciences, anything that we can do, we can foster that type of growth in our state is important. I also think it's vitally important to push it in areas where, either A, you've got a cluster already, or B, where they've really not had that much growth. And how do you do that? So,
Yeah.
there are all sorts of models around the country. The Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses program
Hmm.
is one that I can point to. But, to get us there, I think it's going to take some really outside the box thinking in terms of our economic development approaches and some collaboration. You're right, with the private sector and the public sector. They're vitally important to this recovery.
Yeah, and as you know, there's still lots of money on the sidelines, certainly in the investment community. And look, they're looking for returns. They're looking for solid investments to make, and they're very opportunistic. And they're going to find them, and people are going to be presenting them to them, and they're going to go somewhere. They might as well come here. I mean, that's the whole idea of economic development in a nutshell, is it not, Trey?
That is absolutely right. I spoke on a panel, or gave a small presentation at the International Economic Development Council in 2019 in Indianapolis at their annual meeting. And the topic, or the title of my talk, was, "Is economic development enough?"
Yeah.
And I would argue that it's not. The traditional approach to economic development is not enough. I mean, economic development now is full service. It's really, it's going into the schools. I mean, if I'm an economic
Agree.
developer in a thriving community, I want to get an assessment of everything that's going on in the school system, and that might mean going to read to children and just understanding where we are. And as I travel around the country as an economic developer, maybe I'm going overseas, I want to bring all of that back to not only the students, but I'm going to look at existing industry. I'm looking at all those things, but more importantly, I'm perhaps a housing developer. I've got my housing development hat on because I want to build communities and neighborhoods. I've got my broadband infrastructure hat on, pushing that to make sure that is a vital component of my community, whether large or small. Um, I just think economic development is such a broad term now that you've just got to wear many hats. And that goes all the way back to the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Kelo versus the City of New London, where we dealt with the takings clause. But it's just evolved so much. And I think
Mm-hmm.
the economic developer in post-COVID-19 society has to wear numerous hats and has to be just a really innovative, creative figure.
Yeah, excellent analysis. I don't think it's anymore a matter of, well, I've become a certified economic developer, therefore I know how to develop economic projects and grow the economy and grow wealth. It's just so many more facets to it than that. I couldn't agree with you more. But, Trey, I'm going to make a final comment as we're headed to a break, and we're going to let you go. But we need to keep our best and brightest talent in here in the state of Mississippi, and that may mean crossing over into some, maybe it's tax abatements or so forth, some legislation that may not be comfortable for a lot of folks, but we're subsidizing the other states effectively. We create these very talented individuals at our great universities, and then they just leave. We got to stop that.
That's another conversation. I'll be happy to come back on. I know I'm preaching
to the choir. Thanks so much for coming on today, Trey. Excellent commentary, and your perspective was spot on. You stay safe, my friend, and we'll talk to you soon.